Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be talking about the console war from the perspective of Microsoft and what they can learn from Sony's announcements, the issues they're going to be facing, and to a slightly lesser degree, how they could mitigate the circumstances and their possible responses. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is not confirmed, but I'm just going to be going into some educated guesses and into some facts and some fun speculation. And obviously, I'd prefer to hear you guys comment as well. So, anyway, jumping into things. Now the PS4 has actually been formally announced, there are several things that we know for certain, and one of those are the technical specifications of the PS4. There are a few things we're not 100% certain about yet, such as, for example, the look of the darn thing. But generally speaking, most people know now that the PS4 has 8 gigs of RAM, we know what the processor is, and we know how fast the graphics card is, and right off the bat, this is very important for Microsoft, because they know, hey, these are specifications that we have to go against. Now, there's a good chance that Microsoft knew this stuff. There's a good chance that they've been, keeping up with the rumours, and to be honest, they could have had spies anyway in Sony's camp, But regardless of the fact, they know now this is 100% definite, this is what they've got to go up against. Now the problem with this is if Microsoft were to make an announcement right now based upon the previous specifications that were leaked about the Xbox 720, assuming those specifications were correct, it goes basically that the PS4 is better. It's that simple. On paper it has more graphics cores, it has 12 on the Xbox and 18 on the PS4. That's quite a discernible difference in terms of raw compute power. Computing power is quite a lot more. The CPU is basically the same between the two consoles, nothing there. The same amount of memory between the consoles. If anything, I've heard that the PS4 actually allocates slightly less memory to system functionality than the Xbox, although that's still up in the air, and of course this is not confirmed. But the difference mostly is memory bandwidth. In the case of the PS4, it definitely has considerably more. And unless Microsoft have really changed the technical specifications since this supposed leak, and they've improved the small buffer that's there, that buffer is very small and can't really hold that much data. It's, in its fairness, is not really supposed to. It's more of a band-aid than a complete fix. But I would have liked to have seen it increased somewhat substantially in size, at least 4 to 7 times, maybe even 8 times, not 7, sorry, 8 or even 12 times larger than what it is. Something like 512 megs would have been quite nice, but as it is, it doesn't even break out of double digits, and in fact it's way down there. So with all of that said, Microsoft, if they were to announce, they're not going to be able to wow the hardcore gamers, the tech heads, those people, by saying, hey, you know what, here's what our console can do, here's the, the raw power. And in Sony's, in Sony's defense, they were actually very forthcoming with the console. Most reveals of consoles are very hushed in terms of what they actually can do. Most of the time console developers aren't really that happy to say, hey, this is the amount of memory we've got, this is the amount of power we've got, and, just imagine all the awesomeness. In fact, even the PS2 and the original PlayStation, the PS2 was really notorious for this. Sony were very shady. I wouldn't like to use the word shady, but they certainly weren't that forthcoming. They said, hey, we've got this amazing graphics engine, and they showed off all these, awesome demos. For example, Gran Turismo and pre-rendered footage, and they were saying, hey, this is going to be the future. And of course, when it was released, we found out the console was nowhere near, of course, capable of this. And to the Sony's credit, they've learned a lot from this in the next generation of console. In terms of the PS4, they've learned that, hey, you know what, we're just going to be really honest. And that's good for 2 reasons. One, it doesn't give them bad publicity. It doesn't make, the people who are in the know, it doesn't make them think, hey, this is not really going to be able to produce this stuff. And 2, it also makes those same people salivate, and that creates a buzz, because if you were to say to someone, hey, you know what, this is what my console's capable of, it's going to really make a buzz in the industry, and it really does work. Whether Microsoft are going to be able to, kind of pull the rabbit out of the hat. They really did with Xbox 360. I remember when Xbox 360 was being launched, I actually rewatched the damn launch trailer like 2 or 3 times. I think his name is Jay Allard. My brain's a bit tired, so probably got that completely wrong. Anyway, I remember him speaking about the Xbox 360 and saying about how it was going to run 720p, and although we didn't really get to the specifications of how much memory is going to be in there and everything like that, he did really make it clear and concise, and it was a very good demonstration. And that's one thing that I will say Microsoft and Sony are both equally good at. Both companies are absolutely splendid at being able to put on a good show, and to Sony's credit, they really did that extremely well this time. So hopefully Microsoft will have made some changes from the previous kind of iteration that's been floating around in terms of raw technical specifications. As I've said, I would prefer they have more actual GCN cores. I'd prefer it to be at least 14 or higher. Preferably, I'd like it to be the same as the Xbox, sorry, the PS4. I'd prefer it to be the 18, but whether it will be, who knows? It could be too late in the game. They could have been false documents. Who knows? I mean, for all we know, the Xbox 720 couldn't be released until, you know, say March next year, or it could be, hey, it could be 2 years down the line. We just don't know, but it's unlikely, of course, it'll be that late. Another point as well that I will say about the whole thing is games. Now, Sony are really focusing on the games right now, and there are some titles. I'm a PC gamer, as anyone on the channel who watches regularly knows. I'm a PC gamer. That doesn't mean I don't like console gaming. I just typically prefer PC gaming. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, when I was growing up, I, you know, loved consoles and stuff, but my friends, a couple of my friends owned PCs, and I was just like, wow, Doom and, you know, Half-Life and all these games, and it was just amazing. Well, I actually played Half-Life originally, but still. And the modification scene, for example, Skyrim. I could bore you guys, but I won't. But just suffice to say, generally I prefer keyboard and mouse controls, and just the general feeling of PC gaming. Not to mention the price is a lot better, especially in the UK. I don't know what it's like in the US. I haven't really looked, if I'm totally honest. However, I will say, when I saw Resistance, and I saw, let's go with Infamous, and I saw some of the other titles on the PS4, I will be honest, and I would say that I was incredibly impressed. And I'm not going to do a direct comparison in this video and say, oh look, you know, Crysis doesn't hold a candle to Resistance, or Resistance is, you know, not as good looking as Crysis. I'm not going to go into that. It's an unfinished game, for goodness sake. But what I will say is the smoothness of the gameplay. The fact that I saw that game and I knew the console was not struggling, it's very impressive. And more to the point, and I'm kind of going off a little bit of the beaten path, as you guys know, I do have a tendency to speak for England. I really could do that. However, as I was saying, one of the issues I have with Xbox 360, and indeed it was made quite publicly aware, as some of you may say, it was put, Microsoft was put on blast by one of the Xbox's founders, and they said that one of the problems that Microsoft are facing, it's quite simple. They're not really focusing so much on games as they should do. And Microsoft have a lot of clout, by the way. Now, to begin with, Microsoft were being a bit naughty, and they were holding back some titles from the PC, and, you know, they were bribing the developers and what have you. You can say bribe, we can say, you know, making it more lucrative for them to say, hey, make it, you know, exclusive on our console, whatever you want to say. And I'm not bad-mouthing Microsoft for that. That's just a policy that they chose, and it was a smart one. It, you know, they had games on their machine that no one else had, and that was great. You know, Alan Wake, I've mentioned a couple of times, Gears of War, a few other titles. However, in later years, they're focused really on media, and while I understand the appeal, shall we say, of, say, people being able to stream Netflix on the Xbox, and I have no problem with Netflix, I have a Netflix account, I love it, and blah blah blah, but the bottom line is, I'm buying the console not to be able to play Blu-rays, not to be able to stream movies, not to be able to, you know, make my toast in the morning. What I am buying it for effectively are the games, and I feel that Microsoft kind of lost a few steps here and there. Now, allow me to kind of diverge for a second and say this. One of the problems I have with the Xbox 360 was actually the Kinect-like device. The Kinect isn't a problem. I don't have an issue with it, just like I don't have a problem with any alternative input device. But what I feel that Microsoft really did is push that to a very heavy degree. Sony didn't. Even with the PS4, despite the fact that the eye technology is extremely impressive, they didn't really mention it. They didn't really hammer it home. And one of the reasons for that is you and I, in other words, the core gamers, I'm expecting most of you who are listening to this are very hardcore gamers anyway, or at least you know your stuff, or at least you're interested in it. And okay, some of you may own a Kinect. I personally don't, and most people I know who are heavy gamers, they don't own one. Those of you who will probably rush out and buy Infamous or buy the latest Gears of War, or you're drooling over pictures of the new Grand Theft Auto. There's a good chance that you may own a Kinect, but it's probably something you just own just to test it out, or maybe when friends are around or what have you. It's not really the solid gameplay experience. Sony knew this. Sony knew they made some mistakes, and the same founder who blasted Xbox and Microsoft's choices, that he actually, to a degree, blasted Sony as well. He said, hey, you know what, Microsoft and Sony are both making the same mistake, and there's Nintendo giving you rabbit punches in the back. Don't forget, even take Nintendo out of it. Let's pretend for a second Nintendo doesn't exist, and I'm not saying that to offend any Nintendo parties, but let's just say that you can pretend that Nintendo is this omnipotent power that you can't touch, and the other companies can't rival if you prefer. And let's just pretend that only Sony and Microsoft are in the picture just for a second. Well, what happens then is you've got another company that could possibly step in, and you know what that company is? It's Apple. And imagine an iOS device is released that can plug into your console, into your TV. That's what a lot of people are worried about, and it's a massive threat. And to be honest with you, you need to get a very solid base of gaming right now, and it's not really there as much as it should be. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, the end of the generation of consoles is really fast approaching. You can't really get blood out of a proverbial stone, and they really are trying right now. It's very difficult to get more performance out of these consoles. So sure, Microsoft have had some really good first-party stuff. They've got their own franchises. I'm going to obviously use Gears of War. I'm obviously going to use, say, Halo. But the problem is, look at the PlayStation's lineup. Now, I don't actually have the list on me right this second, I'll be totally honest. I actually forgot to bring it up, and I'm not going to start Googling for you guys. You can do that yourselves if you really want to. I'm not going to read off a massive list, that's just boring. But I do remember titles like even Blizzard getting excited with Diablo. You've obviously got a massive list of third-party developers, and one of the reasons for that is simple. It's just a cool system to develop for, and we really need more titles like that. Third party must be there. It must be heavy. You must have the Call of Duties in the world. You must have say Diablo 3, or you must have something similar. In other words, third party developers have to be there. Sega lost third party developers on the Dreamcast. One of the reasons for that was it was very easy to pirate for. I mean, there was many reasons of the Dreamcast, but I'm not going to go into all of them. But they lost a lot of third-party developers, especially for the Sega Saturn as well. And what happened? The console died. It literally just died a death. Unless you're producing, games for the machine other than yourself, you just can't sustain it. Sega did have some really good exclusives. So first-party stuff and third-party. I would like to see, of course, Rare are owned now by Microsoft. So, new titles, for example, Rare are known for, of course, Killer Instinct. Possibly a new Forza Motorsport. Who knows? Obviously, there's possibilities of other titles, but we'll have to see. But to be honest with you, of course, everyone knows that Call of Duty is likely going to be on the console. But what Microsoft cannot afford are more repeats. They cannot afford, say, Konami to say, hey, Metal Gear Solid 6, and of course it's not been announced, I'm just saying, if. But let's say, for example, Konami were to say, hey, Metal Gear Solid 6, 7, and all the other Metal Gear Solids for the foreseeable future are going to be released exclusively on the PlayStation 4. And then, they can't have, say, Final Fantasy being released exclusively to the PS4. They have to give massive incentives to either make the game multi-platform at the least, or have some exclusive third-party games on their system, because that's what sells systems. One of the examples of that is, let's say, for example, the PS4 ends up looking better in terms of graphics in the Xbox. Well, most of the time you're just going to buy the game that looks better. I mean, let's say both games cost you the same price. Why wouldn't you go for the system that looks better, unless most of your friends own the other system? So, for example, let's say that the PS4 is the same price as the Xbox. Let's assume that the Xbox has slightly worse graphics, but all your friends own the Xbox. You're going to go with the Xbox most likely if you're multiplayer inclined. Obviously, if you're a forever alone type, you might not. But let's just talk about the general person here. Now, even if the next generation of Xbox is extremely backwardly compatible, I've heard some people on my Facebook and various other feeds here and there complain about the PS4 and say, hey, you know what, why isn't it backwardly compatible? I've already been into a video on this, and I do understand Sony were caught in between a rock and a hard place. But at least they were honest. At least they said, hey, you know what, we could possibly make some cloud-based technology in the future, and that'll do this and this and this. And you know what, it's not an ideal solution. They didn't obviously say it's not the best solution that we could possibly ever have come up with. Obviously, they could have put, say, a PS3 in the PS4 housing as well, which would have made the console obviously a lot larger, a lot more heat, and blah, blah, blah. But at least they addressed it. Obviously, Microsoft could do the same thing. Now, obviously backwards compatibility in, say, 3 years' time isn't so much of a big deal. But let's say, for example, you're an early adopter. Let's say, like myself, I bought the original Xbox 360 on launch, which is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, because I had to get mine without the hard drive because there were no more available. But you know what it's like when you want the latest technology, you just don't really care at the time, and then it bites you in the ass really, really, really hard, and then you can't sit for a week. However, my point being that when you first adopt a console, and the same happened to me, by the way, for the PS2, there are very few games on launch. Okay, there might be a couple of really good titles. For example, the PS2, there was, say, Tekken Tag, which I played the hell out of. I was a massive Tekken head back in the day. Massive. I, entered tournaments and blah, blah, blah. But one of the things was that game kept me kind of sustained, and there were some other games that came out slightly later, Devil May Cry, for example, Gran Turismo. I'm not saying that they released on launch or anything, but kind of not so far into the future it's ridiculous. However, all of that said, there was many times that I was either playing on my PC because I just couldn't be bothered to play Tekken, or the other 1 or 2 games that were out at the time, or for example, I was just playing PlayStation 1 games, or I think I even had my Saturn still plugged in back then. You got the idea. In other words, there was a lot more need to play than previous generation of games, because, well, it just made sense to. And of course, the same thing when the Xbox was first released. Many people were still playing Halos, of course, the first couple of Halos on the Xbox, the original Xbox, because Xbox Live hadn't really flourished to a massive degree on the 360. Not everyone owned one. There wasn't Halo released. There wasn't X, Y, and Z. Gears of War hadn't been released. Therefore, competitive gaming. We had Perfect Dark, which I played a little bit out of, and it wasn't a bad game. But there wasn't a massive competitive scene for console gamers. Therefore, there was a need for backwards compatibility. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be the case in this particular instance. Microsoft could have a backwards compatibility, plan. They could have, they could have the prerequisite parts already installed. They could have an incredible emulation system. They could even be doing it cloud-based like Sony, but they need to make an announcement, and there needs to be some, honesty there. I'm not saying Microsoft are going to lie, I'm just saying they really need to kind of address that in the initial conference. Okay, so I know I'm coming across a little bit negative on Microsoft, and that's not because I'm, anti-Microsoft. I actually love Microsoft. There's a couple of reasons for this. I actually really respect Bill Gates as what is accomplished, and I really like what they've done for the PC generally. Now, obviously, there are some people who are screaming that they did this and this, and I totally agree. They're not perfect for company by any means, but I do like what they've done with gaming. They have made some really big strides, and one of those things is what I'm about to talk about, and that is bringing the multiplayer gaming to a really finely tuned kind of almost clockwork way to the console, and that is Xbox Live. Now, as a PC gamer, it might not be a massive thing for you to load up Steam and for you to say, let's go with Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and you to see on your friends list on Steam that, hey, Tom and Bill, I don't know why I keep using Tom and Bill as names, but hey, whatever, are online, and I'm gonna ask them if they can play some free-for-all with me. Okay, cool, done, and that's it. But for consoles, it wasn't really like that back in the day. You know, the PS2 had kind of an iffy system where there wasn't really one unanimous login for all the games, and it had very dodgy kind of voice chat. And Xbox One did do some good things, but even the Xbox One, the original Xbox, it wasn't perfect. It served as a good beta platform, and I think, to be honest with you, that's what Microsoft released it as, a beta platform. Say, hey, this works, this doesn't work, here's what we need to fix, and they did do a lot of the fixing. Xbox Live came out, and obviously there have been numerous improvements on Xbox Live. Obviously you've got cross-game chat, so if, for example, you're playing on, you know, Mary's Funhouse and your friends playing Kill 'Em All 2000, that's absolutely fine. You can do cross-game chat, which is an issue, of course, for the Sony machine. You can, for example, do things such as video conferencing. You can do all the normal stuff, and it's very easy to find games. It's a pretty lag-free service. There is, of course, some contention, there is some argument, there is some debate, and there is some criticism towards Microsoft, and I know I used lots of words that are very similar to the same thing, but regardless, my point being that Microsoft have come under some fire because of the Xbox Live Gold. Obviously, with Gold, you have to pay a certain fee. Obviously, if you shop around, you could get a bit cheaper. Mentally, however, for a consumer, if you were to sell something for 99 cents or pence or whatever your currency happens to be, and someone else is to give that same service for free, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to go for the free service 99% of the time. Why wouldn't you? It just makes sense to do it. Even if the price isn't a problem for you, even if, like, you are rich, even if you are, you know, even if you've got, say, 2 million kicking around in the bank every week from your job, the fact of the matter is, it's just a pain in the butt to have to worry about, you know, having to renew the service, and, you know, just mentally having to pay for something. Now, I know some of you are gonna, you know, argue about this and say Xbox Live is fantastic, and, you know, only poor people complain about paying for it, and these are, you know, things I've heard bandied about the internet all the time. To be honest with you, I don't have a particular problem paying for the service, generally speaking, as long as the service is fairly flawless. And of course, Microsoft didn't have that massive issue that Sony did with the outage, and you remember the hacking scandal. I'm not really going to go too much into it in this particular video, but you remember that when the PSN went down, and then Sony had to try and make some reprimands. In fact, I've actually heard some people say that they actually got rid of their PlayStation 3 for an Xbox because of that, because, you know, they were getting pissed off that, you know, a particular game came out at roughly the same time, they couldn't play it online, and then they felt a little bit uneasy, actually, because of the time that Sony spent to actually tell people that, hey, your credit card details could have been well, they could have been compromised, and that was a massive error on Sony's part. They should have really said something instantly. Even if they weren't sure of the level of damage, they should have been forthcoming. It just makes sense to the customer's perspective. It really does eventually come around and bite you in the butt. It always does. Someone will find out sooner or later, and it just happens. Anyway, I'm kind of going off the beaten track. Microsoft do know what works well with Xbox Live. They just need to make it more game-centric. They just need to make sure that the games work on it instantly. They just need to make sure that, you know, they look at all the stuff that Sony have incorporated. Now, obviously, there are rumours that Windows is going to be the base operating system for, well, for the Xbox. And I don't really know how I feel about that. To be honest with you, I'm not a massive fan of Windows 8, which is, of course, rumoured to be the base, you know, kind of base start. I haven't really played around too much with Windows 8. A couple of reasons for it. I don't generally jump on a new OS when it's first released. Windows 7 was well, an exception for me, and one of the reasons for that, I actually really bothered to beta test at the time for Windows 7. I actually downloaded it. I think if I memory serves, it was because I actually had to format anyway, so I just decided, hey, you know what, I might as well try Windows 7 on the system. But Windows 8, it didn't really work out like that, and I don't generally like to test an operating system I haven't really got to test out for a long time. And in a production environment, obviously I'm doing RGT, so I don't really want crashes or difficulties or program errors, and I know really that's not been the case for Windows 8. It's been fairly seamless, other than a few issues here and there. Regardless, I'm sorry, I'm getting really off the beaten track today. This is what you get for very bad sleep. As I was saying, the problem being that Microsoft just need to make sure that their service is at a level with Sony. They need to come out with some heavy punches. They can't just say, hey, you know what, we've got a share button like Sony, and we have this and we have that, and all of it is very similar to Sony. They need to make sure that they have some things in there that Sony just said to themselves, I don't know why we didn't think of that. We're silly to not do that. If the console's less powerful, it needs to be able to do more stuff. Now we do know that Sony's system is going to be able to browse the web at the same time, for example, as being able to play a game. So, for example, let's say your brother. Let's say your brother is playing. Let's say your brother's doing his homework or what have you, or your girlfriend's on Facebook on the PC, and it's not, or you can't even be bothered to get up the couch. Let's just be blunt, and you just want to see how the hell do you pass this sodding boss on this game. I just don't understand it. Nothing's working. Is it a bug, or am I just going about this wrong point? What's the weak point in this boss? And you just need to go on GameFAQs or whatever website just to check it out. And so you don't have to quit the game anymore. That's a big thing. So, and obviously Microsoft have made media a very big thing for the Xbox. They've gone on record a couple of times, have said this, the media is going to be a huge thing for the next generation of Xbox. And you can actually tell that by looking at its specifications. Once again, if you're curious about that, feel free to look at the comparison between Durango and Orbis. It's on the channel. I've actually got a couple of videos. I would suggest you look at the latest one. Not all the information was 100% accurate, because obviously Sony have recently announced about 8 gigs of RAM rather than 4, but other than that, it's pretty much all good to go. So, as I was saying, they need to make sure that the games are there. They need to make sure that a lot of the sharing aspects are for games. They need to make sure that their press conference is just as wow. Obviously when Sony announced that there was going to be a massive conference for gaming, everyone knew in their heart that it was going to be the PlayStation 4. Why? Because Sony were putting so much work into it, and they were saying PlayStation redefined, and with all the trailers and stuff, if it turned out to be something like a slightly redesigned PlayStation Vita, or they were to say make PlayStation Plus a standard thing for the for the PS3, I'm just using this as examples, people would have been pissed. People would have, drop-kicked the CEO of the company. They would have been angry because, they knew what was coming up. They knew that the next generation of console was needed. And so this is a big thing. So does that mean that Microsoft is screwed? Does that mean that, they can't win, and I use the word quotation mark there in big capital words, in the next generation of war? No, of course it doesn't. It means that they just have to play their cards right. They have the talent there, for goodness sake. They're not a small company. They have the talent. They can buy in the talent. They can redevelop the operating system. They can change things around. They just need to make sure that when they announce the console, there is a good buzz in the air. The initial 6 months of the console, they cannot, for example, have another fiasco with the Red Ring of Death. It can't happen. It just can't happen again. They need to have said, hey, you know what, we learned from the mistake, we know we screwed up, and that's it. Obviously, there's always going to be a few manufacturing problems with a next generation of console. It just happens. It just, it's just the case. Even the PlayStation 3 had the problem. It wasn't so prolific, as it turns out, for the PS3, although it did have some issues. It wasn't so, lols, there wasn't memes basically being created for it, at least to the degree of the Xbox. Right now, both companies are on kind of a free ride, actually. Microsoft are on a free ride in terms of there's no expectations in terms of, they've announced this, so the console has to live up to this. There are also no expectations in terms of they've got time. They're not a poor company. Their Xbox is still selling reasonable. It's obviously not selling as well as launch, but it's still selling. The games are still selling. They've got new games in development. All these things are one thing: time. They're buying themselves time. They can indeed, delay things if necessary. Do some revisions. Say, hey, we need to make this change in the software. Or, hey, you know what? This console's not 100% stable. We need to, we need to do X, Y, and Z. They're not really pushed in terms of that. Obviously, time is a slight factor. They can't take another 3 years, for example, to release the console. But what they can do is they can make sure it gets right. The second thing they need to make sure is when the console is announced, they need to make sure that obviously it's a good funder. Now, Sony are on a different kind of free ride. Sony's free ride is that basically everyone right now is talking about the console. It's that simple. I mean, it's the reason I'm producing these videos. One, I'm damn well excited about the console, and two, my audience wants to know about the console and, you know, my opinions for what they're worth. You know, they want to know what I think about it, and they want to, you know, talk about it. There's a buzz about it, and there's a reason for that. They were the first to announce. Microsoft had the same thing on the previous generation of console. I remember when Microsoft first launched and, you know, said, hey, you know what, look at our consoles. Everyone was really excited because it was the first next generation of consoles. Obviously, the Wii U is technically, you know, released first and all, but everyone knows the Wii U is not graphically going to be able to compete with the next generation of consoles. And that's not a besmirchment on Nintendo at all. Nintendo weren't going for that. Nintendo were going for, you know, their own thing. And to credit Nintendo, and I must say, they do produce really good games. I can't ever say to myself, you know, I've owned a Wii, I've owned an N64 briefly, and I've owned a GameCube, and despite the fact that I've not been a massive Nintendo gamer, I didn't own a SNES and all of that type of stuff. I was more of a Sega fanboy, to be honest with you. But what I will say are the games that I've played on Nintendo's consoles, Zelda, for example, Mario, blah blah blah, they have that seal of quality, and you know that if you buy Zelda, and okay, it does have critics, you know, some people will say, hey, we're just going into the same dungeon, lol, 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 again and again and again, or, you know, Princess Peach has been rescued, it needs to be rescued again, this is, you know, really new territory. But the fact of the matter is, no one gives a rat's ass. The fact of the matter is, when you're playing the games, they're fun. They're good, they're excellent. Okay, there have been a few tragedies. For example, Metroid. Yeah. Anyway, regardless of the fact, it's been a very cool for Nintendo in terms of their games. Generally, they're very good quality. Sony and Microsoft have obviously been more the hardcore gamer, the gamer that wants, you know, a lot more. Obviously, they're going to have Activision support, but once again, they can't afford to lose good faith with gamers. They need to make sure that the people who own Xbox 360 right now, in other words, you know, if you're looking at your desk and you're seeing Xbox 360 there, they want you in 2 years' time to be seeing the Xbox 720 there. They don't want you to start switching, you know, allegiances. They don't want you to say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna switch to a PlayStation just because it's first. They want you to have, oh, you know, they don't mind if you own both consoles, as long as you primarily buy the games, of course, for their console, because obviously it's not just about the games, about the console themselves. Everyone could buy your console, but if no one's buying the games for the console, no one's going to third-party support you. It's that simple. So because of this, that's another issue they've got to take into account. So what are Microsoft's moves right now? Well, they have to be smart, and although that's a bit of a stupid statement for myself, they have to be really, really careful with what they do. They have to announce at the right time. It would be stupid of them to try and do it now. If they were to announce right this second, it's not going to make any difference. It's just going to be panic. It's not going to happen. They're going to announce when they're ready. They always do, and it's smart to do so. They need to make sure that all of their, you know, ducks in a row. They need to make sure that their console is ready. They need to make sure that the software is stable. They need to make sure that it's at least as impressive looking, maybe even if not graphically. They need to make sure that their system is not just going to be, hey, we could play games and also look at all these media functions. They need to make sure that the games they're going to be showing are going to be darn impressive. I actually got chills when I saw Resistance, I will be honest. And I'm not even a massive Resistance fan or anything. I just thought to myself, holy crap, this is looking impressive. Thank goodness we're actually getting onto some next generation of console here. It feels like developers have been developing games with like one hand tied behind their back, and, you know, kind of having to use Vaseline on the lens occasionally because of the graphic capability of this generation of consoles. It's just that simple, and of course PC have also been suffering here as well. It really is that simple. So yeah, Microsoft have to be a bit careful here. They can't just randomly start making bad choices in terms of design. They need to make sure that all of the aesthetics in terms of the controller is perfect. I don't necessarily know if they're going to go with a new controller design. They might do. They're probably just going to redefine, and refine what they've got. There was some issues, in my opinion, with the Xbox 360 controller. The D-pad was not exactly perfect, which for certain games, fighting games, for example, it's not exactly what you want. Okay, most people do use sticks, but still, The LNR triggers weren't exactly as comfortable as they could have been. However, other things such as the guide, for example, is really well implemented, probably better than the PlayStation. Another point being that I think the whole where you download games was a lot smoother on the Xbox. You just download the games and it's very, very, very minimal installations and so on. It's a lot more intuitive. Obviously, they've got to fix that on. They've got to improve that further. Obviously, not including the hard drive as standard for the original design of the Xbox 360 was a big issue, and I don't really understand why they didn't, considering the original Xbox One did indeed have a small hard drive in there. I think it was 10 gigs formatted to 8 or something like that as usable. Memory's a bit rusty on that. Regardless of the fact, Microsoft can definitely pull out a rabbit out of the hat here. It's not like they're, screwed. It's not like they don't have very impressive developers working for them. It's not like they don't have the technical expertise. They just need to implement it well, and there are a lot of lessons they could use from Sony. Obviously, Sony have gone first. They've shown what they've got up the sleeve. They've shown what they can and cannot do, and I think all of this is kind of going on to one thing. The next generation of console war is really going to make or break quite a lot of developers, and while that's always the case, I think it's really going to shine through here. We're really getting to the point where everything is becoming extremely interactive. For example, Microsoft could make it where you play with PC gamers. I don't necessarily know if they will do that, but they could do that. That would be quite a big coup. For example, let's say you know your friend who plays PC gaming all the time, and you want to play with him. It could be good. Obviously, you'd need keyboard and mouse support, or you'd absolutely get massacred on something like a Twitch-based FPS, for example, Call of Duty. I'm just using it out there. Obviously, various integrations of social media. All of that is, by the by, and not exactly really news. But anyway, I think I've rabbited on enough. I think I've covered all the ground that I really wanted to in this particular video. I know many of you are extremely excited about the PlayStation. I don't, however, want to come across as biased, and I'm really looking forward to both consoles. Obviously, we know now what the Wii U is capable of, and that's fantastic. And I'm happy with it. I must say, I do like the Wii U, and I probably will eventually get one at some point in the next... if I can get the damn word out, this is what you get when you're tired, in the not-too-distant future. So, regardless of all of this, hopefully you've left this video with a sense of what are Microsoft going to do. I'd like to hear some comments. What console would you like to see? What would you like in terms of the console? What features would you like? What do you think that Microsoft can really do? Obviously, Microsoft did make 720p to be the minimum last time. Obviously, Sony are going for 1080p this time. I'm unsure if Microsoft could compete with that with the current level of cores that was on the reference design. Hopefully the reference design was only a phase in the development, and then they decided, hey, you know what, we need to boost this up, this isn't going to work, we need to make this more, we need to increase this, and what have you. You get the general gist. Regardless, I think I've talked enough now. I'm going to get going, so take care of yourselves, bye for now, and hopefully you've enjoyed the video.